Live na po tayo, sir.
Live na,
And
ma'am.
now, we are live. Okay. Isang magandang hapon po mga ka-Pix Pro. Kamusta po? From Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. Magandang hapon. Hi, BTC. We missed you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, ED Arlene. And we have a very exciting topic yet again today. We are being graced by our customer and partner, Mr. Gabriel Tuason. And our resource speaker for today is Mr. Dick Bussiere. Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon. So,
Good
ano po,
afternoon.
very jam. Sir Dick is from, where are you coming from today, sir? You're eating live from where?
Live from Singapore.
Okay. And si Sir Gabo ay hindi po very, si Sir Gabo, very supportive. Naka-Pix po shirt pa po siya.
Thank you.
Okay.
Always.
Sir Dick.
This one's
afternoon,
quiet.
everyone.
Okay. So, so mga ka-Pix po, continue to like, share, follow, and of course, subscribe to our page. Again po, libre po ang ating members sa Pix po. So don't forget po to become a member of and become a part of this advocacy. So, kamusta naman po ang cybersecurity world for the past week? PPC, kamusta po ang inyong linggo? Happy birthday, by the way. It's your
Thank
birthday.
you. Yeah, thank you. Very busy as usual. So as if everyone is following the news, we all know that there were so many attacks, being published. So having a lot of calls and meetings with our customers in the Philippines. So today, actually, ED Arlene, I'm wearing two hats. Of course,
Yes.
number one is the Pix Pro hat, which is everyday naman, we wear that. And then secondly, my day job is with Tenable. So that's my second hat for today.
Thank you, PPC. How about Sir Gabo naman? Coming from very matunog ang industry niyo ngayon, Sir Gabo, with the news. Kamusta naman po ang trabaho natin bilang cybersecurity expert?
Yeah, always the same. Exciting. But yeah, a lot of things happening, no? Big companies, big cybersecurity companies have been coming out, being vulnerable. Say, over the weekend, you've heard about, what happened to some of the bigger companies. And then just very recently, we've heard about this local privilege escalation with Microsoft operating systems, which are currently unpatched, no, 0 day. So yeah, always we need to be on our toes. We need to be guarded. We need to be paranoid to some extent, no. So trust no one, zero trust. But hopefully, we've done our due diligence for each one of us. And whatever hits us, maybe we can recover fast enough so as not to have a major impact on each of our businesses.
Totoo po. Parang walang rest day talaga when it comes to cybersecurity. So, walang weekend. We're working 24/7. So, ito po na madami ng ating live audience coming from our Facebook Live. From Lumanta, Eric. Hello, mga ka-Pix. So, magandang hapon po sa iyo. Okay, we have Joel Valentino Duque. Magandang hapon po. Mga ka-Pix, we encourage you to put your location as well para naman mabati natin yung mga kasama nating mga ka-Pix kung saan mang tulok man kayo ng mundo ngayon, whether you are in the Philippines or outside the Philippines. Pare-pareho po tayo ng advocacy. So, magandang hapon po sa inyo. From Sean Lee, hi po, ka-Pix Pro. Sir Wendell pala, one of our tech partners is watching. Magandang hapon, sir. Sir Marlon, Hino is also watching with us. Sir Marlon, hindi siya sumama sa atin today, but he is watching virtually. So, hi, Sir Marlon. Maayong hapon, ka-Pix po. Maayong hapon, Sir Wendell, once again. Okay, from Davao City, Marlon J. Banzuelo, magandang. Okay, hello mga kapiks po from Sir Nilmar Dolina. So, I guess we have a lot of audience who's actually waiting for this episode for today. So, VP, will you do the honors of introducing our topic po and for with our guest speaker coming from Tenable po.
Okay, hold on na, AD Arlene.
Okay, the VP. In the meantime, balik po muna tayo sa ating live audience. Lasana and Kita, good afternoon po. Yan lang hapon. Mga kapiks po, huwag po nating kalimutan aside from of course, supporting our advocacy, libre po ang ating membership. So if you want to become a part of a bigger advocacy, don't forget po to become a member. Magandang hapon.
All right, okay, let's introduce our topic for today. Hold on. Okay, so our topic for today is aligning cybersecurity with business objectives. So it requires a holistic approach, convergence of IT and OT. So the abstract is this future-proofs the organization against emerging cyber threats and positions it as a leader in adopting advanced technologies, brings significant business value if undertaken correctly. Okay, and we have our guests from Tenable. So we have our OT expert live from Singapore. His name is Richard Bussiere, and he's been with Tenable for 10 years, right, Dick? And he's very well known in the industry, been a practitioner for a very, very long time and has experience, with IT, and now he's focusing in OT security. ED Arlene, maybe you would like to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, so we have in our midst one of the pillars, if I may say, in terms of cybersecurity practice here in the Philippines, the CISO or the Chief Information Security Officer of the Energy Development Corporation, no less than Sir Gabriel Vicuato. So magandang hapon. Good afternoon to the both to our both to the gentleman who is with us today.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for having us here.
Again, thank you, Sir Gabas. Sir Vic, if you may, you can start with your presentation.
Okay, I can begin now?
Yes, sir.
All right, perfect. So this will be the presentation, and I think the first slide is very appropriate, even if you haven't seen the movie. Everything, everywhere, all at once. And that's kind of where we are from a cybersecurity perspective, especially when we start to look at OT, when we start to look at the converged threat surface. And what we're trying to say, pretty much the theme of everything that we're going to be talking about, is that whether you appreciate it or not, everything is connected together somehow, either directly or indirectly. And the fact that everything is connected together means that everything, all these interconnections that we may or may not have visibility to, that we may or may not completely understand, are exposing us to known and worse, unknown risk within our lives and within our technical operations, and in my case, within operational technology, which forms the basis of how modern life actually works. So we're going to talk about some of the more recent attacks. We're going to talk about who is getting attacked and how they're getting attacked. And then we're going to talk about what you can do to help fix it in more or less a vendor agnostic way. So a couple of recent attacks that I would like to talk about. And it's a massive, massive impact. And this is one that occurred in November 2023. And coincidentally, I was actually in Australia when this attack occurred. It was a cyber attack against a container port. And container ports are things that we don't think about very much on a daily basis because they're just kind of there. The ships come, the ships go. But what people fail to realize is how critical that these container ports are to everything because of the intricacies of supply chains today. Because I might have a PC that's manufactured or final assembly takes place in the United States using integrated circuits that were fabricated in Taiwan, for example, using plastic parts that may have been fabricated in the Philippines. All of these parts are going to go in the container ship and are going to be integrated at some final assembly point. But in order for today's society to work, and I think COVID kind of taught us this, everything has to keep moving. When an attack occurs against a container port, a cyber attack, it basically shuts that container port down and nothing can get in or out of that container port. And the thing that's interesting, and one of the themes about this, is the ripple effect that a disruption on any piece of infrastructure, container port's a great example, but the ripple effect it has on society. Those plastic parts that I'm making in the Philippines for that PC that's being final assembled somewhere else, that production line that's 3,000 miles away is going to come to a screeching halt because of this attack on that container port. So that's the whole point, and that's why attacks like this are very, very important. It's very disruptive, and the financial impact is crazy. You're going to see that in a second. Here's another example. This one occurred again in October, or it actually occurred in around August of 2023. But the impacts against this company are still being felt. This was a disruption for Clorox, who makes bleach, against the company's IT infrastructure. And look at what happened to their stock price. Okay, they had a loss of between 35 cents and 75 cents per share. You multiply that, it turns out that it's going to cost billions of dollars at the end of it in lost market capitalization for Clorox. Next thing, okay, the impact of this particular attack actually was felt all the way into Q1 of 2024. So not only does a cyber attack against critical infrastructure have an impact at the very beginning against the organization, but it has a long tail. The ripple effect will be felt for a very, very long time. The third and final example. Now, this was definitely not a cyber attack, but what it did do is it illustrated the relationship between seemingly unrelated things, where in fact there is a very tight connection between one service and the things that support that service. This occurred in October of 2023. It was essentially a data center, that Equinix data center, and it impacted, I think it was DBS in Singapore, Development Bank of Singapore. Now, in Singapore, we have the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, and they impose exceptionally tight requirements on availability and security for any financial services institution, any financial services organization such as DBS. The regulation is exceptionally explicit in terms of what the operator has to do. But a big gap in the regulation is it failed to take into account the supporting infrastructure. So although the regulations were very tightly described and enforced for the IT infrastructure that was owned by DBS, the regulator never thought about the supporting infrastructure for that IT infrastructure. Okay, so the Equinix data center, they did some maintenance on the chillers. The maintenance took longer or went wrong. And the cooling system in this particular data center was actually offline for about 12 hours. Computers don't like to be hot. They shut down. And the ripple effect on DBS's customers was extraordinary, where DBS was down for a very, very long time, and they were severely punished at the end of it all by the regulator. But again, what this is illustrating is I have a parallel system. They're not tied together, but they are intimately interrelated. And if one goes down, the other goes down. Cooling system in the data center goes down, servers go down, the service goes down. Very interesting and very true. So think about this from a cybersecurity perspective. If I'm a bad guy and I want to take out one of my competitors, I want to take out a service that's very important, I don't have to attack that service directly. I can attack that service indirectly. I can go after the data center, which is probably not nearly as well secured as the service. If I take down the data center, I take down the service and I take down that company. So unrelated or seemingly unrelated, but very, very intimately related. Now, who gets attacked? The most popular form of attack is ransomware because it's financially driven, it's motivated. The number one type of organization that gets hit with ransomware is manufacturing. Let's talk about that for a minute. Why? Because availability in manufacturing is paramount. If I take out the facilities, the machinery of production, if I take out my ability as a manufacturer to produce things, you're basically stabbing me right in the heart. Because if I'm not producing things, I'm not producing revenue. So I have a choice. I can say I'm not going to pay the ransom and not pay the ransom, but it's going to take me a long time, maybe days or weeks, to get my manufacturing plant up and running. My alternative is the ransom guy wants $100,000. Every hour I'm down is $300,000. I think I very well might shut up and pay the ransom and get my manufacturing plant back online. That precise reason, that financial motivation, is exactly why manufacturing tends to be the number one type of organization that gets extorted by ransomware. And then it goes down from there. But there's a financial reason to attack these guys, and there's a motivation for the victim to pay the money and move on. So that's very important. Talk about attacks with consequences. And that's another interesting thing when we start to talk about operational technology, is that the attacks against operational technology have a physical consequence. In the ransomware example, the physical consequence is I'm not producing anything. This physical consequence can occur whether it's the IT stuff that gets hit or whether it's the OT stuff that gets hit. But it's worse when you hit the OT stuff, because then you end up having environmental or life safety implications. A very simple example. Most amusement park rides are run with the types of components that you would typically find in an operational technology environment, using programmable logic controllers and things like that. If I compromise the operation of that programmable logic controller on an amusement park ride, what happens? The amusement park ride malfunctions, people get hurt. If I do something against a controller, against the operational technology equipment within a water treatment plant, what happens? The water stops flowing or the water comes out contaminated. No matter what, it has a very consequential and very, very physical impact. Now, if we look at it from a financial perspective, and that's kind of what I was trying to do with the Clorox example and the container port example, I think that there are three orders of impact that occur when a cyber attack occurs against operational technology. And this is really kind of from a business perspective. The first order impact is that you have an immediate disruption to your business operations. Your production stops, the water stops flowing, the parts stop flowing off your production line. It's an immediate production disruption, and you have immediate and easy to calculate financial losses as a result. So in the first order of impact, that's the least of your problems. The loss is tangible, it's measurable, and you probably have a way to resolve it on a relatively quick scale. However, we start to talk about the second order impact. And going back to my plastic part made in the Philippines example, I have a disruption to my supply chain. The guys who I'm selling that part to can no longer keep their production lines open. That results in secondary losses, second order losses, and it results in me breaking my contract to the person I'm supplying to. I now have service level agreement violations. which frequently have a financial consequence. So immediately, there's a tangible financial loss for every single one of my customers and disruptions to their operations or their production. And it gets worse, okay? Because the first thing that happens, my reputation is now damaged in the eyes of my customers. My customers may say, I don't have good cybersecurity, I'm going to find another vendor because I don't trust these guys anymore, and they may take me to court. So what ends up happening is that the financial impact and the overall impact on the business goes from fairly minor to very severe, very, very, very quickly. Because the second order and third order impacts, I think, actually have a lot more financial implications than the first order impact of any cyber attack. We can see this if we look at this slide here. So again, let's look at the financial impact. And this is coming from a Harvard Business Review report that came out it was basically May of 2023. On average, if you're a publicly traded company, there's going to be about 7.5% decline in your stock price. For the average size company or the average market capitalization of a company on NASDAQ that was hit, that was about a $5.4 billion loss in market capitalization. The number that really, really, really sticks in my mind, though, is the second order impact. It's about 26 times what the first order impact is going to be. So for every dollar cost me, when I add up the aggregate of the impact on my supply chain and on my customers, the dollar value of that impact is about 26 times as bad as it was for the impact on me. And on average, for the first year after a cyber attack, the stock price will underperform by about 12%. So again, what I said here is proven to be very, very, very true in the post-breach analysis that we can do. If we look at trends in OT cybersecurity, like I said earlier, ransomware forms the largest set of attacks. There's a good reason for that. If the attackers are able to get into the operational technology part of the infrastructure, then the systems within that infrastructure are generally not very well maintained from a cybersecurity perspective. OT environments are rarely patched, and they're rarely patched for a simple reason. The implications of applying a patch, sometimes to the guy that's in control of the plant, he or she may say, I don't want the risk of you patching that system because I don't know if the system will work after you apply the patch, so don't patch. That means that the systems in the OT environment are not patched well, and it means if an attacker manages to get in to the OT environment, it's fairly easy to compromise those systems and take the plant down. So ransomware is about, I think the number is about 72 to 75% of attacks against critical infrastructure or against operational technology. The verticals that get attacked, manufacturing. I think food and beverage is manufacturing. If you look at the sum of all these pies, it ends up being the largest percentage. Transportation, second. Very interesting. The number of attacks that have physical consequences has ramped up significantly. So it used to be, I think the next slide will kind of go into some numbers, but it used to be theoretical. And around the year 2020, around the time COVID hit, we started to have a dramatic ramp up in attacks that have some kind of a physical consequence. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. If we look at the statistics, we can see that, again, like I said, around the year 2020, it changed from what if to what's happening now. We expect that attacks that really have physical consequences will go from what it is now to maybe 4,000 incidents annually by 2027. Ransomware by far the largest numbers. The links between IT and OT, we call this IT-OT convergence. The links where people have interconnectivity with their partners or interconnectivity between their IT and their OT are growing very fast. The majority of those links are not understood in terms of the ramifications, and they become a very, very nice vector to exploit the situation. And the last thing that we want to note is that government and industry regulations are increasingly looking at the implications of IT-OT convergence. and that's something that needs to be considered. Some statistics from 2022, if we look at what did happen, attacks with physical consequences, 14 of Toyota's automobile manufacturing plants had some type of a cyber attack. They had to shut down 14 plants for a number of hours. The financial implications of that are very high. Look at Bridgestone. 23 Bridgestone plants got hit. Well, guess what? Bridgestone doesn't make tires. Toyota doesn't make cars. There's your supply chain problem. We had some outages at Maple Leaf Foods and Macmillan Publishers, flight delays from attacks on airports or airport infrastructure in 4 different countries. There were some attacks against metals and mining operations, in many cases with severe equipment damage. We have the cargo problem that I talked about at the very beginning. And interestingly, 2 of the victim organizations went bankrupt. Now, when we look at it, we can say in the case of the port I talked about with Australia, not all the attacks that had physical consequences actually touched the OT itself. And back to my story about DBS, indirect impact on systems by associated IT systems. So the systems don't have to be directly related in order to have a physical impact from a cyber attack. Couple more slides, and then I think it's time for discussion. One thing to keep in mind, different problems, different ways to think about things. When you're talking about OT, your primary KPI as a plant manager will be making sure nobody gets hurt, making sure my production never stops, and making sure I'm putting out good product. In IT, it's the very classic CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So you're really solving the same problem, but you just are using different words to describe it. Let's take a quick look at the entire attack surface, because we've been talking about OT, but in reality, it's all tied together, everything, everywhere, all at once. Sure, we have risk in the industrial facilities. We have the risk of IT-OT convergence. The risk is amplified or helped by problems with identity management. There are very often connections that you may or may not even know about between your OT environment and the cloud. A good example of that comes about from IoT devices, intelligent devices that rely on some kind of a cloud service to operate. Means that you may have interconnectivity that you don't even know about or haven't analyzed properly between the OT environment and the cloud itself. You also, in many cases, there are cloud services that are used to predict things, to analyze inventory, to predict weather, to look at power demand, that will have potentially an indirect impact on your OT environment. So an attack on a cloud could affect your OT environment, even though your OT environment itself was never touched. All over the place, we have interconnectivity between various web applications. Again, you're dependent on this. We talk about IoT. If anybody on this call uses Google Home and links it to a third-party device, for example, a D-Link smart switch, if you think about the setup process you went through, you introduce your D-Link smart switches web application to Google Home web application. And there's an API between D-Link and between Google Home that's going to be leveraged in order to make this Google Home application work properly. That's an example of a web application that you don't think very hard about, but it does exist. Compromise the web application to the D-Link smart switch or smart plug, you break your infrastructure. Again, the number of IoT devices that have some kind of relationship on the cloud, and even some kind of an indirect relationship between 2 different vendors, that's growing very fast. We have internet-facing apps. We have internet-facing assets that might live in OT. And last, but certainly significant, we have on-prem IT devices. On-prem IT devices, which may end up being, through the IT-OT convergence, somehow directly connected to your OT environment. So at the end of the day, everything, everywhere, all at once, everything is related somehow in ways that we can't even conceptualize. That means that we need to protect our entire infrastructure, not just one part or another, and we need to do it in a cooperative way. We can't be thinking in silos anymore. We have to be thinking as a team. We have to be thinking holistically, and we have to be thinking about the risk that every part of this might be exposing us to. So I think that I think I will probably leave it with that because we're already about 30 minutes into the session. So I'm going to stop with the PowerPoint, and I think it's about time to take questions or have a nice little chat about what we've discussed so far. So I guess who's going to moderate?
Okay, thank you very much for that very
Thank you.
comprehensive discussion about OT trading. So I would just like to know from the perspective of someone who is working in a critical infrastructure. For example, ano ang inyong comment as a practitioner and a cybersecurity expert on the presentation of Sir Dick
Yeah,
regarding critical infrastructure?
yeah. So
Yes, ma'am.
one of the biggest issues when you run a critical infrastructure, and particularly sa industry namin, is nabanggit din naman ni Dick, no. We talk about CIA in IT, right? In InfoSec, and it's really reverse, no. In OT, it's availability is the one of the top requirements along with health and safety. Well, health and safety first, right? Before there's availability. But one of the biggest differences also is speed. When you're in the IT world, you talk about, let's patch this, let's let's move this along, pabilisan yan eh. Kasi pag naiwan ka, you'll be vulnerable to attackers, no? Unfortunately, you cannot do the same in an OT environment. No, I've, not to criticize anyone, but I've just noticed this. No, I've heard about, I've attended a lot of sessions, talking about practical tips on OT security, etc., etc. But the reality is, you just can go in and patch a DCS or a PLC. No, you can't really do that. You have to wait for certain timing and everything else. No, you go do that and you lose na, between you. For example, for every hour of business, you lose 85 million pesos, for example, if you're a power generator. And what's worse is if your plant goes down, simply because you're trying to patch something and something goes wrong, it goes bigger than the money of the company. The Philippine situation, especially in terms of power, is very thin. Even up to now, I think we're operating on a yellow alert, red alert basis. No? So one power plant goes down, it affects the whole Philippines. And it affects the whole GDP and the other socioeconomic factors. No? So that's one. Speed. And so the question has always been, so how do we manage these systems? No? My advice is you treat them with different levels of priority. In my case, what we did was we classified them as ABC. Class A, for example, are the ones really connected to the plants, right? To the plant operations. Class B, the ones, the HMIs, the ones running this plant systems. And Class C are the ones being used by operators, for example. So we have different patch schedules for those. One is we patch them annually based on, just as an example, no? We patch someone, for example, we patch them annually based on risk assessments that are done on an annual basis. Class B, they're a heavy user interface, human machine interfaces, for example. You review them on a quarterly basis. And then the normal laptops and the desktops that your operators use, you patch them on a per need basis, no? At the minimum monthly, if there's new security patches coming in, and then they do the same. But at the end of the day, when you talk about security and cyber physical systems, it's you aligning to the OT guys, no? To the ones in the plants. Remember again, their responsibility is to run the plants, and any disruptions, your company tends to lose money, and in our case, even the whole Philippines gets affected. So there has to be synergy, no? And you have to get the basics right. You can't be sexy at the onset. Eh. For example, are you segregated? Are you micro-segmented? If not, then that's going to be a big problem. So you do try to air gap your systems during the start, but as Dick said, no, the IT and OT convergence is happening very, very fast. So you need to have boundaries in place. And to be fair, one of the things that made it easier to me to explain all of these concepts of segmentation and everything else was due to the COVID pandemic. But there was no cure during that time, right? When it started, there was no vaccine, there was no cure to COVID. So what did you do? You had to isolate the system. You had to isolate someone to make sure he or she doesn't affect another person. And that's essentially what it is. When you talk about microsegmentation and layering within the networks, that's exactly what it is. Um, so yeah, it's a very different challenge when you go to OT, and we've always said it's not just the technical skills. You need to maneuver the bureaucracy. You need to be diplomatic enough to convince people. You do your own risk assessments, but you also need to understand that you need to balance this with the business objectives, right? So secure as much as you can, do your due diligence, do your basic things, and then hopefully with especially with patches, which is really very, very difficult to do in an OT environment, especially with legacy systems. Um, you put a strategy or a tactic forward that can be agreed by both, the ones handling cybersecurity, information security, to the ones running the plants. So hopefully that answers your question, Yuli.
Thank you, Sir Gabo.
I,
Very
I think
insightful
I'd
and
like
very
to add a
relevant.
little bit. I'd like to add
Yes, yes.
just a little bit because my pyramid slide, I had one pyramid this way, one pyramid that, and I had the CIA and I had safety, availability, and quality. The thing that I think is very important, and Gabriel just touched on it, is mutual respect. So if you're trying to impose cybersecurity on the OT environment, you need to make sure you understand why things are the way they are in the OT environment. It's like it for a reason. These people are smart. They have a hard job. It's hard to keep a 40-year-old power plant running 7 by 24 by 365. Things break all the time. They're always in crisis mode. Okay? Everything's there for a reason. And they don't patch for a reason. You need to make sure you understand that, and you need to be prepared to implement compensating controls because they ain't going to let you touch that PLC. That thing's precious, right? So it's very, very, very true. Mutual understanding.
And you need to be very creative also. No? Sorry, it may sound cliche, but you need to think outside of the box. How can I protect and unpatch systems, which I can only patch 6 months from now because that's the preventive maintenance schedule. What do I do now? So you have to think of how you can, layer all of these things, determine the number of, ports in your firewalls available, for example. Even just changing a simple IP address can wreak havoc on your system. So again, it's very difficult to do things, in an OT environment.
All right, thank you, Sir Gabo and Dick, about for sharing those insights. We have a question here, so maybe let me just read it. What would be the possible impact on a national scale if the grid is hacked or compromised? So any one of you can share thoughts, about this.
Yeah, well, first of all, everything we're using now needs power, no? If essentially it goes down, we lose power, we lose everything else, right? Everything needs power to run. If you don't have any backups, then that's not going to happen. But more importantly, and depending on the type of attack that happens, there's possible loss of life and, catastrophic damage to the environment. And it may be, there's some geopolitical issues in play also, right? It's not just a cybersecurity issue. So for all you know, it's a test moving forward. It may be a prelude to as Dick said a while ago, no, possible increase in kinetic attacks, right? So It may be all of those things. It may be, remember in Ukraine, right? Even before Russia attacked Ukraine, they did attack one of the power plants in Ukraine and tested what they can do and what the effect is. So there's a huge economic impact if we lose our grid, simply because you don't really have backups for it, right? We have some microgrids, we have some island grids, but it won't run the whole country. We had this problem during the time of FVR. We really had no power during the time. A lot of rotating brownouts, right? So the Philippines was really in a bad shape during that time. And that's really bound to happen if something bad goes to the grid, because that's the one that's doing the distribution. That's the transmission line, sorry, not distribution, but the transmission. No? So if you can't transmit energy, the distribution utilities won't be able to distribute any power. So yeah, it's really going to be, can't stress this enough, it's going to be really, really bad. Dick, you know,
I have a lot to add to that. Okay. I think the impact, if it's a short-term outage, people can tolerate it. But put into your mind what happens if I manage to take out a power grid for a whole country and it lasts for 3 weeks. Think about that. Nothing works. Okay? Nothing works. I predict that society would start to actually fall apart after about that time. People are going to start to shoot each other for food. Okay? So it's a good way for an adversary to attack your country without attacking your country. Basically you kill yourself from inside. So it's pretty serious. We have to protect our critical infrastructures. And to your point, I don't know what level of capacity. Okay, maybe this is public information, maybe it's not. I bet you the Philippines is probably running about 90% of capacity. Right now, you have 10% reserve in your power grid.
the
Is that right?
reserves are very, very thin.
Right. So I take out one or
Almost
two
none.
plants, and I take out one or two plants, and I put you in that 2-week scenario.
Yep.
It's easy. Not easy, but it can happen.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Sir Gabo, I remember that FVR time, I was, I think, in high school back then. So it's always, there's no power almost every day until the nighttime. So that was very difficult. Yes, Dick.
What is FBR? I don't know it.
Former President Fidel Valdez Ramos. That's why we call him
Okay.
FP.
Got it.
Yes, during that time, there was a problem with the electricity. So I think that was in summer also, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, there's no school. Everybody's like, outside the house because it's very hot. Okay, so a follow-up question to that. How ready is our country to respond to cyber attacks against critical infrastructure? In this case, an example, the grid.
Well, for me, you can't be ready enough. There's always new threats, new attack surfaces, new set of bad guys just waiting to pounce on someone. How ready we are, I really don't want to get into trouble with anyone, especially we're a regulated company, but I don't think we are ready. The government has been, they're doing a lot of things to. We started with every president, and then you have a cybersecurity plan. It changes, right? I mean, there's some minor changes, but still it changes. No? So imagine a policy that keeps changing every time you change a president, right? So it causes a bit of confusion and change management. I know the DICT and the other agencies have been moving heaven and earth to secure our country. There's the private sector, I think, has done a lot of trying to secure the different infrastructures they have, especially the bigger ones. Well, what I'm worried about really is the smaller ones. The big companies, the conglomerates, they have some money to throw in and secure their infrastructure. probably the small to medium enterprises, the only thing they can buy are basic firewalls and probably antivirus, some of which you can have at home. But then these smaller enterprises, they're the ones really supplying the bigger enterprises. And then you have a supply chain attack coming, right? So there have been efforts to coordinate all of these actions. No, it's a whole of nation approach. Everyone needs to get involved. The government's doing their part. The private sector is doing their part. Everyone is trying to do their part. The civic organizations, the professional organizations like PixPro, ISACA, ISOG, they're all doing their part, right? But then again, it's just too big of a there's no limit, right? It's an infinite determine the number of ports available, multiply that by 100 times 100 again. That's probably the number of attack vectors we have. So short answer is we can never be secure enough. No, you have the likes of CISA, the NSA, the CIA, MI5, they're all be getting breached. So again, the bigger enterprises, the cybersecurity companies are being breached. Right? What more for a country that, and I think one of the advantages we have, well, not advantage, but it's really the interconnection that we have. I mean, there's no central database yet, and that bodes well for the infrastructure that we have, because then you have to go in and the interconnections are not there. You have to jump around before you breach the whole enterprise, which I guess we don't have at the moment. So there's some benefit to being a bit delayed in terms of connectivity and the infrastructure, but we're getting there. So we need better security, and like I said, it cannot be stressed enough. The job will never end.
That's actually a very interesting point you made, is being a little behind is sometimes to an advantage, because as I sit here thinking about massive attacks on power grids, I'm thinking that the way that we did it in 1930 with switchboards and a man moving to do things by hand is actually more secure, because you have to physically be there to attack the thing, or you have to use a bomb. And it's actually more, sometimes I think old school is better. I hate to say it being a techie, but sometimes it is.
Yep. And I guess, when you talk about business continuity planning, BCP, for example, you revert to a manual process, and we're right in between being manual and digital, right? The Philippines as a whole. We've done a lot of efforts, leaps and bounds, but still very far, especially if we use our friendly Asian neighbor, Singapore, as a benchmark, then we're very, very far behind, right?
All right, thank you guys for sharing those thoughts. Edie, Arlene, would you like to greet our viewers first before we go into the final question?
Okay, so first and foremost, we have Sir John Robbie Balimbing. Good afternoon, everyone. Sir Boyet, one of our regulars. Good afternoon. Si Seven Host PH, magandang hapon po, Kapex Pro. And we have Reden, good afternoon po. And Mr. Richard Sabala, good afternoon. So magandang hapon.
All right. Okay, so we have one question from our VP Ruby. I think this is very timely and she's following the news. So following the incidents of rotational power interruption, I think this is for Sir Gabo, what are the measures being conducted in the cybersecurity side to at least ensure, that the cybersecurity side or the IT side is well protected?
Yeah, what I can tell you is, so when the DICT started with the cybersecurity plans, programs to secure the Philippine enterprise, one of their tack is we'll give you a general principle. We'll give you general operating principles, general frameworks to follow, but we'll leave it to your specific departments to formulate your own regulations, if you want to call it that, in terms of cybersecurity. And in fairness to the DOE, they've done a lot. They have this ERS program, Energy Resiliency. I forgot what the S stands for. So they do a survey and they ask you about, how you are positioned. Then they use NIST cybersecurity framework also. So they assess you based on that and based on your maturity. And from there, and again, it's an effort to work with the private sector. So they learn a few things from the private sector also. We have, I think, some of the big energy companies now are using a lot of tools to protect their environment. So they have some money, to put in place. So they give us the proper guidance. We enforce this guidance. We work with them and tell them, these are some of the other things that we're experiencing that you might want to look into. So again, it's really working together, again, the whole of nation approach, but specific to protecting each of the businesses. um we for example, our friends from the other power generators, we don't see ourselves as competitors. We see ourselves as friends and colleagues in the same industry who are under the same threat. And we do have some, intelligence sharing network. For example, we know what's going on. Eh, for example, we had an OTISAC. You hosted an OTISAC, I think sometime in January, So they're trying to promote all of these things to secure our critical infrastructure. Obviously, I cannot say how I'm securing mine. That's like, advertising what systems I have. No, but there is a very big. I appreciate this. There is a very big effort from the government to work with the private sector, and you know, vice versa. And again, to secure the whole, at least, powers. From what I know, no, the DOE is really working hard to establish protocols, guidance, standards for the energy. Obviously, they're just starting, but for me, that's a good step. Aside from, telling people na we'll let you decide to do your thing. We'll just give you a general framework. But no, they really do audits. Two of my plans have been audited already. And the questions they have there are really very exhaustive. And it's just not for cybersecurity. It's they include physical security, they include, what our protocols in terms of in case of a disaster, what happens when we have typhoons, earthquake, etc., etc. So they do a very comprehensive set. Now, how that translates forward, I really don't know yet because they're just starting, no. But for me, that's a good start. Again, everyone working together to secure the cyberspace within the country and beyond, because a lot of us also are operating not just within the Philippines, but also in other parts of the world. And as you know, there's also a Philippines Incorporated hat, right? So if someone operates in another country and they perform well, but somehow gets breached, then maybe it becomes a black eye to the whole Philippines, and they say, "Yeah, you're a Philippine company, you get breached a lot." So there's also that nationalistic sense of pride that we work together and ensure that all of our assets are protected. I,
Thanks,
I I cannot
Joshua.
give a direct answer, obviously, because I cannot, disclose what we have. But yeah, there's work between the government and the private sector. And for me, that's very commendable, especially for the DOE.
Yeah, fully understand. And I think, we appreciate it that there's a lot of collaboration going on within, your own industry, your peers within the industry, and also with the government. So I think that's very crucial. Dick, maybe you can also share some best practices and practical tips, because I know you have been meeting a lot of customers worldwide, globally. So maybe you can share what you have observed.
Okay. What I would say I think what bothers me the most is not knowing, right? And the vast majority of the customers that I've talked to have barely begun to do anything to secure their OT infrastructures. They don't have any monitoring. They don't understand the interconnections between the internal and external networks. They wouldn't be able to detect an attack if it hit them on the head. So if I had to offer any best practice or any first piece of advice, first thing you should do, that would be start to monitor what's there before you do anything else. Because before you can secure something, you got to know what you have to secure. You don't understand the interconnections between external networks. You don't know what's talking to other things. You don't know which devices outside the network have a legitimate reason to be inside and which ones don't. And until you begin to monitor, and until you create that first baseline, you're in a world of hurt. You have to start there. I think that's the first thing you do. Okay, then move on. Second important piece of advice, before you even start to monitor, pick a security framework. This 800, SP 800-82 or 62443. Take your pick, but pick one of them. Read it. Understand what it's telling you and begin a plan to implement what those things are suggesting. Because if you don't have a plan, you're burning money. You don't know where it's going. You have to have a plan before you start to do anything. So if I had to say the best practices, embrace the security framework and monitor what's going on in your environment. Start there. I think the power industry is ahead. There's a reason for that. I have to say the regulator helped, right? Same thing happened in Singapore. CSA, you will do this. You're one of the 11 critical infrastructures. You must comply, must obey. So the regulated industries are first, but everybody else is still in 1999. Before, that's where we are.
All right, thank you, Dick. ED Arlene, would you
Thank you.
like to do the closing remarks?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, first and foremost, Mr. Gabo and Mr. Jay, for gracing our afternoon session. It was truly a worthwhile and meaningful for us, especially in understanding the importance of cybersecurity in ensuring the safety and the operation of our critical infrastructure. So hopefully we will get another session with both of you gentlemen in the coming days. And thank you very much, ating mga ka-Pexpro, for joining again another Friday afternoon session with us. So mula sa aming sa Pexpro, maraming salamat sa inyo. And we are looking forward to another meaningful session in the coming weeks. So maraming salamat, Mr. Gabo. Thank you, Sir Vic.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay. So again, it's Friday, like we always do here in cybersecurity with others ay nagpapahinga. You get to spend time with your family. Dito sa ating cybersecurity, it's a different world altogether. So Sir Gabo, we would also want you to join with us. Okay, so sasabihin po natin happy lang walang weekend. So from your Facebook family to you, let's all together say happy lang.
Happy lang.
Wala. Happy lang.
Weekend.
Walang weekend. Magandang hapon. Thank you very much. Kita na
Bye.
Boss Vic, Sir Gabo.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys.